I never believed in monsters until the night my father died. They found him in his study, slumped over his desk with his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. The physician said it was his heart, weakened by years of obsessive research and sleepless nights. But I knew better. I had seen the terror frozen on his face, the way his fingers clutched at the leather journal he always kept locked away. Whatever killed him, it wasn't something as simple as a failing heart. My father, Professor Heinrich Aldrich, had dedicated the last decade of his life to studying the legends of Transylvania. He was a scholar of the occult, a collector of forbidden texts, a man who believed that immortality was not a myth, but a secret jealously guarded by those who had already achieved it. My mother had died when I was young, leaving just the two of us in our London townhouse, surrounded by dusty books and whispered theories that polite society would never accept. I tried to continue his work after he passed. I spent weeks locked in his study, reading through his journals, tracing the obsessive patterns of his handwriting as it grew more frantic with each entry. He had been close to something, I was certain of it. Close to proving that the legends were real, that somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains, there existed a being who had conquered death itself. And then the letter arrived. It came on a cold October evening, delivered by a messenger dressed entirely in black. The envelope was made of heavy parchment, sealed with red wax bearing the imprint of a dragon. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. The handwriting was elegant, almost beautiful in its precision. My dear Miss Aldrich, it has come to my attention that your late father was a man of remarkable intellect and curiosity. His inquiries into the nature of immortality did not go unnoticed. I believe he was on the verge of a profound discovery when fate, alas, intervened. I wish to extend to you an invitation to visit my home in the Carpathian Mountains. Your father's research deserves to be completed, and I possess knowledge that may illuminate the questions he spent his life pursuing. I can offer you answers, Miss Aldrich. I can offer you truth. Should you accept, arrangements will be made for your journey. You need only send word, and a carriage will arrive to escort you to Castle Dracula. I await your reply with great anticipation. Your humble servant, Count Dracula. I read the letter 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each pass. Castle Dracula. The name itself seemed to pulse with dark energy. My father had written about it in his journals, had sketched maps trying to pinpoint its location, had theorized that the Count was not merely a nobleman, but something far older and more terrible. Every rational part of my mind screamed at me to burn the letter and forget I had ever received it. But another part of me, the part that had inherited my father's insatiable curiosity, wanted answers. I wanted to know what had driven my father to such obsession. I wanted to know if the legends were true. And yes, if I'm being honest with myself, I wanted to know what it would be like to stand in the presence of a being who had defeated death itself. I wrote my acceptance that very night. Within a week, the arrangements were made. I packed only what I needed: practical dresses, warm cloaks, my father's journals, and the silver cross my mother had given me before she died. My few remaining relatives thought I had lost my mind with grief. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I should have stayed in London, married some respectable gentleman, and lived out my days in comfortable ignorance. But I have never been a woman content with ignorance. The journey to Transylvania took 2 weeks. I traveled by train through France and Germany, then by coach through increasingly wild and desolate landscapes. The further east we went, the more primitive the countryside became. Modern cities gave way to ancient villages where people still painted crosses on their doors and wore garlands of garlic around their necks. When I mentioned that I was traveling to Castle Dracula, the reactions were always the same. The color would drain from their faces. They would make the sign of the cross and mutter prayers in languages I didn't understand. An old woman at a coaching inn pressed a rosary into my hands and begged me, in broken English, to turn back. But I had come too far to retreat now. On the final night of my journey, I found myself at a small inn at the foot of the Carpathian Mountains. The innkeeper, a heavy-set man with a thick gray beard, tried to convince me to stay another day. "The Count's carriage comes only after dark, miss," he said, his English heavily accented. "And the road to the castle, it is not safe when the sun sets. There are wolves in these mountains, and worse things than wolves. I'm not afraid of wolves, I replied, though my voice was steadier than I felt. He looked at me with something like pity. It is not the wolves you should fear, miss. It is what commands them. As darkness fell, I stood outside the inn wrapped in my heaviest cloak, watching the mountain road. The other guests had retreated inside, and I could hear them through the windows, their voices low and nervous. The wind carried the scent of pine and something else, something old and cold that made my skin prickle. Then I heard it. The sound of horses approaching, their hooves striking the ground with an unnaturally perfect rhythm. Out of the darkness came a carriage unlike any I had ever seen. It was black as midnight, pulled by 4 enormous horses whose eyes seemed to glow red in the lamplight. The driver was a massive figure wrapped in a dark cloak, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. He did not speak. He simply opened the carriage door and waited. I hesitated for only a moment. Behind me, I could hear the innkeeper praying. In front of me was the unknown, the forbidden, the answer to every question that had haunted my father until his death. I climbed into the carriage. The door closed behind me with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. The interior was lined with burgundy velvet, and a single lantern provided a dim, flickering light. As the carriage lurched into motion, I looked out the window and saw the innkeeper standing in his doorway, making the sign of the cross as we disappeared into the night. The road up the mountain was steep and winding. Through the window, I caught glimpses of sheer cliffs dropping away into darkness, ancient forests where no light penetrated, and ruins of old fortifications long abandoned to decay. The higher we climbed, the colder it became, until my breath formed clouds in the air despite my heavy clothing. And then I heard them. Wolves, howling in the darkness, their voices rising and falling in a chorus that seemed almost orchestrated. They kept pace with the carriage, running alongside us through the forest, their eyes glowing in the darkness like dozens of candles. I should have been terrified. Any sane woman would have been. But instead, I felt a strange exhilaration, as if I was finally moving towards something I had been meant to find all along. After what felt like hours, the carriage began to slow. I pressed my face to the window and saw it rising before us like something out of a nightmare, Castle Dracula. It was massive, a Gothic fortress of dark stone that seemed to grow directly out of the mountain itself. Towers reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. Windows glowed with pale light. And above it all, a full moon hung in the cloudless sky, bathing everything in silver radiance. The carriage passed through an enormous arched gateway and came to a stop in a cobblestone courtyard. The driver opened the door, and I stepped out into the cold mountain air. The wolves had fallen silent. In fact, everything was silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The castle's main door opened, and warm light spilled out into the courtyard. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall and straight, dressed in black. "Miss Aldrich," he said, his voice rich and elegant with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. "Welcome to my home." Count Dracula descended the steps with the grace of a predator, and for the first time I saw him clearly in the moonlight. He was beautiful. I had not expected that. The legends spoke of monsters, of creatures twisted by their unholy nature. But the man who stood before me was perhaps the most striking man I had ever seen. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with thick, dark hair swept back from a high forehead, a strong aristocratic face, and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge and sorrow. He was dressed impeccably in the style of a bygone era, all black save for a white cravat at his throat. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were dark, almost black, and when they fixed on me, I felt as if he could see straight through to my soul. "You must be exhausted from your journey," he said, extending his hand. "Please, come inside where it is warm." I placed my hand in his, and the shock of contact made me gasp. His skin was cold, impossibly cold, like touching marble. His fingers closed around mine with surprising gentleness, and he smiled. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man who has lost something precious and knows he will never find it again. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. "You are safe here. You have my word." He led me into the castle, and the door closed behind us with a heavy finality. The entrance hall was enormous, lit by dozens of candles in elaborate iron candelabras. Tapestries hung on the stone walls, depicting scenes of ancient battles and mysterious rituals. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness. "Your room has been prepared," Count Dracula said, guiding me toward the stairs. "I imagine you would like to rest. We will speak tomorrow evening. There is much to discuss." "Tomorrow evening?" I asked. "Not tomorrow morning?" He paused, and that sad smile returned. "I am a creature of the night, Miss Aldrich. The daylight and I have long since parted ways. I hope you will forgive my unusual habits." A creature of the night. The words hung in the air between us, neither quite a confession nor quite a warning. He escorted me to a bedroom on the second floor. It was surprisingly comfortable, with a large four-poster bed, a fireplace where a fire already burned, and a window that looked out over the mountains. On a table near the bed, a meal had been laid out: bread, cheese, fruit, and wine. "If you need anything, you have only to ring," he said, indicating a bell pull near the bed. "My servant will attend to you. Sleep well, Miss Aldrich, and dream peacefully. You are safe within these walls." He bowed formally and departed, closing the door behind him. I listened to his footsteps receding down the hallway, then the profound silence that followed. I walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit landscape. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound was answered by others, creating a symphony of wildness that echoed through the mountains. I should have been terrified. I should have been planning my escape. But instead, I found myself thinking about the Count's eyes, the sadness in his smile, the way his cold hand had held mine with such unexpected gentleness. My father had been right. The legends were true. Count Dracula was real, and I was standing in his castle, invited into his domain, with no way to leave until he permitted it. I touched the silver cross at my throat, drawing some small comfort from its familiar weight. Then I sat at the table and ate the meal he had provided, suddenly aware of how hungry I was. The food was excellent, the wine rich and warming. As I prepared for bed, I noticed my father's journals stacked neatly on a small writing desk near the window. Someone had unpacked them from my luggage. I opened the topmost journal and found myself staring at a sketch my father had made based on centuries-old descriptions. It was a portrait of Count Dracula. The resemblance to the man I had just met was unmistakable, down to the sad eyes and aristocratic bearing. But my father's sketch had been based on accounts from the 1500s. If this was the same man, then Count Dracula was not merely old, he was ancient. And he had invited me here. Not to harm me, but to offer me something. Knowledge. Answers. And perhaps something more. Something my father had sought his entire life. Eternal life. I climbed into bed, pulling the heavy blankets up to my chin. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wolves continued their haunting song. "Tomorrow evening," the Count had said. "Tomorrow evening we would speak. And I would learn the truth about what he wanted from me, and what terrible price he would demand in return." I woke to find the room bathed in the gray light of late afternoon. For a moment I was disoriented, unsure where I was. Then memory returned with startling clarity. The journey, the castle, the Count's cold hand in mine. I rose and went to the window. The view in daylight was breathtaking and terrible in equal measure. The castle perched on the edge of a precipice, with mountains stretching endlessly in every direction. Far below, a valley was shrouded in mist. There were no villages visible, no signs of human habitation. We were utterly isolated from the world. A knock at the door made me turn. "Come in," I called. An elderly man entered, carrying a tray. He was thin and bent with age, his face a map of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He wore the simple black clothing of a servant. "Good afternoon, miss," he said in heavily accented English. "I am Gregor. I have brought you something to eat." He set the tray on the table near the window. Tea, fresh bread, preserves, and sliced meat. The food was simple but well prepared. "Thank you, Gregor," I said. "Tell me, how long have you served the Count?" He paused, his hands trembling slightly. 40 years, miss, since I was a young man." 40 years, I repeated, studying him. He must be a generous master to inspire such loyalty. Gregor's expression became unreadable. The Count is many things, miss. Generous is one of them. He bowed stiffly. He wishes to see you in the library when you are ready. I will return in an hour to escort you. After he left, I ate quickly, then took care with my appearance. I chose a deep blue dress with a high collar, pinned my dark hair up in a simple style, and made sure my mother's silver cross was visible at my throat. I needed to look composed, dignified, ready to face whatever was coming. True to his word, Gregor returned exactly an hour later and led me through a maze of corridors. The castle was enormous, far larger than it had seemed from the outside. We passed through halls lined with ancient portraits, their subjects watching us with painted eyes that seemed to follow our movement. We descended staircases that spiraled deep into the heart of the castle, moving through rooms filled with dusty furniture and forgotten treasures. Finally, Gregor opened a heavy wooden door and gestured for me to enter. The Count is waiting, miss. The library was magnificent. 3 walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, thousands upon thousands of volumes in dozens of languages. The 4th wall held enormous windows that looked out over the mountains, now painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. A fire roared in a massive stone fireplace, and before it stood Count Dracula. He turned as I entered, and I was struck again by his extraordinary presence. In the firelight, he seemed almost to glow with an inner vitality that belied the deathly coldness of his touch. Miss Aldrich, he said warmly, thank you for accepting my invitation. Please, sit. He gestured to 2 chairs positioned near the fire. As I sat, he poured wine from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses and handed me one. I noticed he did not drink from his own. I trust you rested well? He asked, settling into the chair opposite mine. Very well, thank you. Your hospitality has been most generous. It is the least I can do for the daughter of Heinrich Aldrich. He leaned back, his dark eyes fixed on me with unsettling intensity. Your father was a remarkable man. His understanding of the occult was far beyond that of his contemporaries. We corresponded for several years before his death. I nearly dropped my wine glass. You corresponded with my father? But he never mentioned you. I asked him not to. Our exchanges were of a delicate nature, dealing with subjects that most would consider heresy or madness. He paused. Tell me, Miss Aldrich, what do you know of your father's final research? He was studying immortality, the legends of vampires. He believed that such creatures truly existed, that they had discovered the secret to eternal life. I met his gaze steadily. He believed in you, Count Dracula. A flicker of something crossed his face. Sadness, perhaps. Or regret. Your father was correct. I am what the legends say I am. I am a creature who has lived for centuries, sustained by blood, bound to darkness, cursed with existence that knows no end. The words hung in the air between us. I should have been shocked, horrified, running for the door. But I had known, hadn't I? From the moment I received his letter, from the moment I saw him in the moonlight, I had known what he was. You're not afraid, he observed, studying me with what seemed like genuine curiosity. I am afraid, I admitted. But fear and fascination are not mutually exclusive. My father spent his life seeking proof of your existence. Now I sit across from that proof. How can I be anything but fascinated? For the first time, he smiled. Not the sad smile from the night before, but something more genuine, more human. You are very much your father's daughter. He, too, approached the impossible with curiosity rather than terror. He rose and walked to the window, looking out at the dying light. Your father wrote to me 6 months before his death. He had made a discovery, he said. He believed he had found a way to reverse the curse of vampirism, to return a creature like me to human mortality, to give me back what I lost so many centuries ago. The ability to die, I said softly. He turned to look at me, and the raw emotion in his eyes made my breath catch. Yes, the ability to die, to age, to feel the sun on my face without burning, to taste food without revulsion, to sleep without nightmares, to be human again, Miss Aldrich. That is what your father promised me. But he died before he could complete the work. Yes. And all his research, all his notes on this particular discovery, died with him, or so I thought. He moved back to his chair, leaning forward with sudden intensity. But you have his journals. You have continued his work. Tell me, have you found any mention of this research? I thought of the journals upstairs, the hundreds of pages I had read and reread. There are references, fragmentary notes about reversing the transformation, about restoring humanity to the undead. But nothing complete. Nothing that resembles a formula or a ritual. Disappointment flickered across his face, quickly hidden. I see. Count Dracula, I said carefully. Why did you really invite me here? Surely not just to ask about my father's notes. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost confessional. I invited you here because I am tired, Miss Aldrich. I have lived for 500 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have walked through plague and war. I have loved and lost more times than you can imagine. And I am so very, very tired of existing. The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in my chest. This was not the monster of legends. This was a man in profound pain, carrying a burden beyond human comprehension. Your father believed I deserved redemption, he continued. He believed that even a creature like me could be saved. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps damnation is all I deserve for the things I have done, the lives I have taken. He looked at me directly. But I would like to try. I would like to believe that there is still some spark of humanity left in me worth saving. What are you proposing? I asked, though I think I already knew. Stay here. Study your father's work. Search for the answer he believed existed. Help me find a way to undo what I have become. He paused. In return, I can offer you knowledge beyond anything your father dreamed of. I can show you secrets that have been hidden for centuries. I can teach you about life, death, and everything that exists between. And if I succeed, if I find a way to make you human again, then I will be forever in your debt. I will give you anything you desire: wealth, knowledge, power. His eyes held mine. Or if you wish, I can give you what I am trying to escape. I can offer you eternal life. The words fell between us like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything. You would make me a vampire? I whispered. I would offer you the choice. Not a curse forced upon you, but a gift freely given. Immortality, Miss Aldrich. The chance to never die, to never grow old, to see centuries unfold before you. He leaned back. Your father understood the appeal. Near the end of his life, he asked me to consider turning him. He wanted to continue his studies indefinitely, to pursue knowledge without the limitation of human lifespan. What did you tell him? I told him to think carefully about what he was asking, that immortality is not the blessing it appears to be, that existence without end can become a prison more terrible than death. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. But I also told him that if he truly wished it, if after careful consideration he still wanted this dark gift, I would grant his request. He died before you could, I said, understanding. Yes. And I have wondered ever since whether I could have saved him. Whether, if I had acted sooner, he might still be here, pursuing the research that could have freed us both. I set down my wineglass with a hand that trembled slightly. You're offering me a bargain. Help you become human, and you'll make me immortal. Only if you wish it. The choice would be entirely yours. But yes, that is the essence of what I propose. He watched me carefully. There is one other matter you should understand. If you accept my offer, if you choose to stay and help me, you will be bound to me. Not physically, but spiritually. There is a ritual, an exchange of blood, that creates a connection between us. You would feel what I feel, sense what I sense, and I would be aware of you always, able to find you anywhere in the world. An unbreakable bond, I said, remembering the words from his letter. Yes, a bond that would persist even if you left this place, even if you changed your mind about helping me. Once forged, it cannot be undone. It is the price of the knowledge I offer, the protection I can provide. His expression was grave. I will not lie to you, Miss Aldrich. This bond would change you. It would mark you as mine in ways that go beyond any mortal understanding. Some would call it a curse, others might call it a blessing. But it would be yours to carry for the rest of your life, however long or short that life might be. I rose and walked to the window, needing space to think. The sun had set completely now, and darkness was spreading across the mountains. In the glass, I could see my reflection, and behind it, the Count watching me. Waiting. Everything I had ever wanted was being offered to me. The chance to complete my father's work. Access to knowledge that few mortals would ever possess. And the possibility, if I chose it, of eternal life itself. But the price was steep. A bond that could never be broken. A connection to a creature of darkness that would mark me forever. And the risk that in seeking to restore his humanity, I might lose my own. Why me? I asked, still looking at our reflections in the dark glass. You could have found any number of scholars, scientists, people far more qualified than I am. Why invite the daughter rather than seeking out someone with more experience? Because you are not merely a scholar. You are your father's legacy. His passion lives in you. I see it in your eyes, the same hunger for truth that drove him. He stood and came to stand beside me, though he was careful not to touch me. And because I believe you, more than anyone else, would understand what I am trying to achieve. Not just the science of it, but the humanity of it. I turned to face him, and this close, I could see details I had missed before. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of ancient sorrows, the way he held himself with the bearing of old nobility, the intelligence and pain that warred in his expression. If I refuse, I asked quietly, then Gregor will escort you to the village tomorrow, and you will be free to return to London. I will ensure your safe passage and provide you with sufficient funds to continue your life however you see fit. No harm will come to you. He paused. But the knowledge your father sought will remain hidden. The questions that drove him to his death will go unanswered. And I will continue my existence alone, waiting for another who might offer hope of redemption. It was a choice freely given, without threat or coercion. He was offering me the ability to walk away, but we both knew I wouldn't. I need time to think, I said. Of course, this is not a decision to be made lightly. He stepped back, giving me space. Take all the time you need. We have the luxury of nights ahead of us. Nothing must be decided tonight. The bond you spoke of. When would it need to be formed? Before any true work could begin. It is the foundation upon which everything else would rest. The exchange would be simple, but permanent. His eyes held mine. A small amount of your blood given freely, and a small amount of mine in return. Not enough to transform you, only enough to connect us. A chill ran down my spine. Blood magic, the darkest and most powerful of all occult practices. How long do I have to decide? As long as you wish. Days, weeks even. Though I would ask that you not leave the castle grounds until you have made your choice. The mountains are dangerous for those who do not know them, and I would not have your father's daughter come to harm in my domain. A gilded cage, I observed. A necessary precaution, he corrected gently. But yes, if you wish to view it that way. You are free to explore the castle, to read any book in this library, to ask me any question you desire. But I must know that you are safe. I nodded slowly, understanding the reality of my situation. I was his guest, yes, but I was also his prisoner, at least until I made my decision. I should return to my room, I said. This is much to consider. Of course. He moved to pull a cord near the door. Within moments, Gregor appeared. Please escort Miss Aldrich back to her chambers, and ensure she has everything she needs. As Gregor led me back through the winding corridors, my mind was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about the world had been turned upside down. Vampires were real. Immortality was possible. And I had been offered a choice that would determine the entire course of my future. When I reached my room, I found a fire burning in the hearth and my father's journals laid out on the writing desk. Someone, probably Gregor, had organized them chronologically. I sat at the desk and opened the earliest journal, dated 15 years before my birth. My father's handwriting was young and energetic, full of excitement about the mysteries he hoped to uncover. I read through his progression, watching as curiosity became obsession, as scholarly interest became desperate need. And there, in a journal from 2 years ago, I found it. A single passage, hidden among pages of other notes. The Count has written to me again. He speaks of his weariness, his desire to return to mortality. He believes it is possible, that the curse of vampirism is not absolute. He has offered me access to texts, to knowledge that could change everything I understand about life and death. In return, he asks only that I search for a way to undo what was done to him so many centuries ago. It is dangerous work, heretical work. But if I succeed, I could offer redemption to a soul that has wandered in darkness for 500 years. How can I refuse such a task? My father had wanted to save him, not to destroy the monster, but to restore the man. I closed the journal and walked to the window. Outside, the moon had risen, full and bright, casting silver light across the mountains. Somewhere in the castle, Count Dracula was awake, waiting for my answer. The smart thing would be to leave, to run back to London and forget everything I had seen and heard, to live a normal life, marry a normal man, and die a normal death. But I was my father's daughter, and I had never been able to walk away from a mystery. I touched the silver cross at my throat, seeking courage, or perhaps forgiveness for what I was about to do. Then I rang the bell to summon Gregor. He appeared within minutes, his ancient face unreadable. "Tell the Count I have made my decision," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Tell him I accept his offer, all of it." Gregor's expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Concern? Fear? Pity? "Are you certain, miss? Once begun, this path cannot be abandoned." "I'm certain," I said, though my heart was racing. "Tell him I'm ready to begin. Tonight, if he wishes it." Gregor bowed deeply. "I will inform the Count. He will send for you within the hour." After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. In less than an hour, I would give my blood to a vampire and receive his in return. I would forge a bond that could never be broken. I would tie my fate to a creature of darkness and shadow. And I would begin the work of restoring a monster's lost humanity, with no guarantee that I wouldn't lose my own in the process. The fire crackled in the hearth, the wind howled outside the window, and I waited for the summons that would change everything. "My name is Eleanor Aldrich," I reminded myself. "I am 23 years old. I am a scholar and a seeker of truth. And tonight, I will bind myself to Count Dracula, for better or for worse, in the hope of discovering secrets that my father died trying to find. God help me, but I can hardly wait." Gregor came for me exactly an hour later. His expression was somber as he led me deeper into the castle than I had yet ventured, down spiral staircases that seemed to descend into the very heart of the mountain. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls changed from worked stone to raw rock, ancient and untouched. We passed through a heavy iron door into a chamber unlike any I had seen in the castle. It was circular, carved directly from the mountain stone, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadow. Candles burned in iron sconces around the perimeter, their flames perfectly still in the windless air. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, and behind it, Count Dracula. He had changed his clothing. He now wore a long robe of deep crimson, embroidered with symbols I didn't recognize. His hair was unbound, falling past his shoulders, making him look even more ancient and otherworldly. When he looked at me, his eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight. "Miss Aldrich?" he said, his voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. "You may still turn back. Once we begin, there is no undoing what will be done." "I understand," I said, walking forward on legs that felt steadier than they should. "I'm ready." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Come, stand before the altar." I approached, and he moved to stand opposite me. The altar between us was bare, save for 2 silver chalices and a ceremonial dagger with a jeweled handle. The blade gleamed wickedly in the candlelight. "The ritual is ancient," he began, his voice taking on a formal ceremonial quality. It predates Christianity, predates even the Roman Empire. It is a binding of blood and spirit, a connection that transcends death itself. Through this bond, you will be mine, and I will be yours. You will carry a part of me always, and I will carry a part of you. Do you accept this freely and without coercion? I do, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He picked up the dagger, holding it reverently. Then we begin. Give me your hand. I extended my right hand, palm up. He cradled it gently in his left hand, and even through my racing heartbeat, I noticed again how cold his skin was, like touching ice. With his right hand, he brought the blade to my palm. This will hurt, he warned, but only for a moment. The knife was sharp. The cut was swift and clean, a line of red across my palm. I gasped but didn't pull away, watching as blood welled up from the wound, dark crimson in the candlelight. He held my hand over one of the chalices, letting the blood drip into it. Each drop seemed to echo in the silent chamber. Enough, he said after a moment, and he pressed his thumb against the wound. I felt a strange tingling sensation, and when he removed his thumb, the bleeding had stopped, though the cut remained. He set down the dagger and held up his own hand. Without hesitation, without the need for a blade, he dragged one long fingernail across his palm. Black blood, darker than mine, welled up and dripped into the second chalice. It seemed to move with a life of its own, thick and somehow alive. When his chalice was filled, he pressed his palm closed and the wound sealed instantly, leaving not even a scar. He lifted both chalices, swirling them gently, mixing the contents. My red blood and his black blood spiraled together, creating a liquid that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. You must drink first, he said, offering me the chalice that had held my blood, now mixed with his. I took it with both hands, trying to keep them from shaking. The liquid inside was warm, almost hot, and it seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart. I could smell copper and something else, something ancient and dark and powerful. Drink, Eleanor, he said, using my first name for the first time, and accept the bond. I raised the chalice to my lips and drank. The taste was indescribable, copper and salt and something sweet and terrible all at once. It burned going down, a line of fire from my throat to my stomach. I felt it spreading through my body, rushing through my veins like liquid lightning. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. And then I felt him. It was like a door opening in my mind, a presence that was not my own suddenly sharing space in my thoughts. I could sense his age, the weight of centuries pressing down. I could feel his loneliness, vast and echoing. I could taste his sorrow, his regret, his desperate hope that perhaps, this time, something might change. I staggered, and he was suddenly beside me, one arm supporting me before I could fall. The chalice slipped from my hands, but he caught it with supernatural speed. Breathe, he commanded gently. The connection is overwhelming at first. It will stabilize. I clung to him, the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become fluid and strange. Through our connection, I could feel his concern for me, his careful attention to my heartbeat and breathing. I could sense him holding himself back, keeping the full force of his presence from crushing my fragile human mind. Gradually, the intensity faded to something bearable. My vision cleared. My heartbeat slowed. But the sense of him remained, a constant presence at the edge of my consciousness. Better? He asked, his voice close to my ear. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. Good. Now I must complete the bond. He guided me back to the altar and picked up the second chalice. This is the difficult part. When I drink, you will feel everything I am. All the darkness, all the hunger, all the centuries of blood and death. You must hold on, Eleanor. You must not let it consume you. I'll try, I managed. He held my gaze as he raised the chalice to his lips. I am sorry for what you are about to experience, but there is no other way. He drank, and I fell into darkness. It was like drowning in an ocean of blood. Centuries of hunger crashed over me, primal and overwhelming. I felt the deaths of thousands, the taste of fear and pain and life draining away. I experienced wars fought in shadows, betrayals executed in darkness, loves lost to the inevitable march of time. I felt power, vast and terrible, and the crushing loneliness that came with it. I felt what it was like to be a monster. But underneath all of that, buried deep beneath the darkness, I found something else. A spark of the man he had once been. A boy who had loved his family, who had believed in honor and duty. A young warrior who had fought to protect his homeland. A man who had been betrayed by the very powers he had sought to appease, transformed into the thing he had spent his life fighting against. I saw his first kill, the horror and revulsion he had felt. I saw him trying to resist the hunger, trying to maintain his humanity, and slowly, inevitably, failing. I saw centuries of struggle, of hoping that perhaps this night would be his last, that perhaps dawn would finally come and grant him the peace of true death. And I saw his hope, fragile but persistent, that perhaps I could give him what he had sought for so long. Not death, but life. Not darkness, but dawn. Not damnation, but redemption. I came back to myself gasping, tears streaming down my face. I was on my knees on the stone floor, though I didn't remember falling. The Count knelt before me, his hands on my shoulders, steadying me. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and there were tears on his face too, gleaming like diamonds in the candlelight. "I am so sorry you had to feel that." "You're not just a monster," I said, my voice raw. "You were made into one. Against your will. You were betrayed." He closed his eyes, and a shudder ran through him. "You saw. I saw everything. The ritual that transformed you. The men you trusted who promised you power to save your people and instead cursed you to darkness. You never wanted this." "No one ever wants this," he said bitterly. "No one sane, anyway. Immortality is a prison, not a gift. I have tried to die 1,000 times, Eleanor. I have stood in the sun, thrown myself from cliffs, plunged stakes through my own heart. Nothing works. I am bound to this existence by forces I do not fully understand. Forces that perhaps only your father's research could have unraveled." I reached up and touched his face, wiping away the bloody tears with my thumb. Through our bond, I could feel his shock at the gesture, his disbelief that I was offering comfort rather than recoiling in horror. "We'll find a way," I said. "We'll finish what my father started. I promise you, Count Dracula, I will help you find your way back to the light." He caught my hand in his, pressing it against his cheek. His skin was still cold, but somehow it no longer felt dead. It felt like marble warmed by trapped fire, something beautiful and terrible at once. "Call me Vlad," he said softly. "My true name, the name I was born with. If you are to be bound to me, you should know who I really am." "Vlad," I repeated, testing the name. It felt strange on my tongue, intimate and dangerous. He helped me to my feet, and I realized that I felt different. Not transformed, not vampire, but changed nonetheless. I was more aware of everything. The flicker of each candle flame, the subtle shifts in air current, the steady beat of my own heart, and the absence of his. "The bond is complete," he said. "You will notice changes gradually. Enhanced senses, increased strength, the ability to sense my presence no matter where I am. And I will always be able to find you, always know if you are in danger." "And you?" I asked. "What do you gain from this?" He smiled, sad and beautiful. "I gain hope. For the first time in centuries, I have hope. Through you, I can feel the warmth of life again. I can remember what it was like to be human. You are a light in my darkness, Eleanor. A reminder of what I am fighting to return to." He led me out of the ritual chamber, back up the endless stairs. But this time, I noticed things I had missed before. I could hear the rats moving in the walls, smell the ancient dust and older stone, feel the slight tremor of the mountain itself. When we reached my room, he paused at the threshold. "Rest now," he said. "The bond will settle over the next few days. You may experience strange dreams, moments of disorientation. It is normal. Do not be afraid." "I'm not afraid," I said, and realized it was true. I should be terrified. But instead, I felt strangely exhilarated. When do we begin the real work? Tomorrow evening. I will show you the archives, the texts I have collected over centuries. We will begin to search for what your father found. He hesitated. Thank you, Eleanor, for giving me this chance, for seeing past the monster to the man beneath. Good night, Vlad, I said. His eyes widened slightly at hearing his true name from my lips, then he bowed and turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart still racing. I touched my palm where he had cut me and found only smooth skin. The wound had healed completely, as if it had never been, but I could still feel him, a constant presence at the back of my mind. His loneliness, his hope, his careful attention to my well-being. The bond was real, unbreakable, and terrifyingly intimate. I went to the window and looked out at the night. The moon was high, flooding the mountains with silver light. Somewhere out in that darkness, wolves were hunting. And in his own chambers, Vlad was thinking of me, just as I was thinking of him. I could feel it through our connection, the awareness flowing both ways. What had I done? What had I agreed to? I had bound myself to a vampire, to a creature of darkness who had killed thousands over his long existence. I had drunk his blood and given him mine. I had opened my mind to horrors that would haunt me for the rest of my life. And yet, I didn't regret it, because I had also seen the man beneath the monster. I had felt his suffering, his desperate desire to return to the light. I had sensed the spark of humanity that still burned in him, waiting to be fanned into flame. My father had been right. Redemption was possible, even for the damned. I climbed into bed, suddenly exhausted. The ritual had taken more out of me than I had realized. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt Vlad's presence in my mind, watchful and protective. Sleep well, Eleanor, his voice whispered through our bond. Dream of sunlight and life. Dream for both of us. I smiled and let myself sink into darkness, where I did indeed dream. I dreamed of a man standing in sunlight, his face turned toward the warmth, tears of joy streaming down his face. I dreamed of gardens and laughter, and the simple pleasure of tasting food. I dreamed of mortality and its precious, fleeting beauty. And when I woke the next afternoon, I knew what my purpose was. Not just to complete my father's research, not just to solve an intellectual puzzle, but to give a man who had suffered for centuries the greatest gift of all, the chance to be human again, even if it cost me my own humanity in the process. The bond pulsed gently in my mind, and I felt his gratitude like a warm tide. He had heard my thoughts, sensed my determination, and he was both humbled and terrified by it. You are remarkable, his voice whispered through our connection. Your father would be proud. I touched the silver cross at my throat, wondering what my mother would think if she could see me now. Would she be horrified that I had bound myself to a vampire? Or would she understand that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places? I rose and prepared for the evening ahead. Tonight, the real work would begin. Tonight, I would start unraveling the secrets of immortality, searching for the key that would unlock Vlad's prison. And if I succeeded, if I managed to restore his humanity, what would happen to our bond? Would it break, releasing us both? Or would it persist, tying me forever to a man who had once been a monster, but might, with time and effort, become something more? I didn't know the answer, but I intended to find out. The sun was setting when Gregor came to fetch me. He looked at me differently now, with a mixture of respect and concern that hadn't been there before. You carry his mark now, miss, he said quietly as he led me through the corridors. I can see it in your eyes. You are changed. I know, I said, but I'm still myself, still Eleanor. For now, he replied cryptically. But be careful, miss. The bond goes both ways. You may illuminate his darkness, yes, but his darkness may also shadow your light. It was a warning, and a valid one. I thought of the horrors I had felt during the ritual, the centuries of blood and death that were now part of my memory. Could I hold on to my humanity while carrying such knowledge? Could I remain good while bound to something that had done so much evil? I didn't know. But I had to try. Because if I couldn't, then there was no hope for either of us. We descended to the archives, a vast underground library filled with texts that predated printing, that had been written by hand in languages both living and dead. And there, among the ancient wisdom of centuries, I would search for the answer that had eluded my father, the answer that might save us both, or damn us completely. Vlad was waiting for me among the books, his dark eyes bright with hope and fear in equal measure. When he saw me, he smiled, and for just a moment, I saw not the vampire Count Dracula, but the man Vlad, who had once been mortal and dreamed of being so again. "Shall we begin?" he asked. I walked forward to join him, our bond humming with shared purpose. "Yes," I said. "Let's begin." The days blurred into weeks as I immersed myself in research. The archives were vast beyond imagination, containing texts that scholars would kill to see. Ancient grimoires bound in leather I tried not to identify, scrolls that crumbled at the slightest touch, stone tablets covered in cuneiform, medical texts from forgotten civilizations, alchemical formulas written in code, and among all of this, hidden in fragmentary references and cryptic allusions, the secrets of vampirism. I worked through the nights, sleeping only when exhaustion forced me to rest. Vlad was always nearby, translating obscure languages, explaining references I didn't understand, guiding me through centuries of accumulated knowledge. Through our bond, I could feel his growing hope each time I discovered something promising, and his crushing disappointment when yet another lead proved false. We fell into a rhythm, the two of us alone in the lamplight while the rest of the castle slept. Sometimes we would talk for hours about philosophy, about science, about the nature of life and death. Other times we worked in companionable silence, each absorbed in our own research but always aware of the other's presence. I learned things about him that no history book had ever recorded. He told me about his mortal life, about growing up in a time of constant warfare, about the impossible choices he had faced as a young ruler. He spoke of his first wife, who had died believing he was dead, throwing herself from the castle walls in grief. He told me about the moment he had been transformed, the agony of it, the horror of waking to an existence he had never asked for. And in return, I told him about my life, about growing up with only my father for company, surrounded by books and secrets, about the loneliness of being too intelligent, too curious, too strange for polite society, about the fear that I would die having never truly lived, never having accomplished anything of meaning. "You are accomplishing something of great meaning now," he said one night, looking up from a text he was translating. "You have given me more hope than I have felt in centuries." "We haven't found the answer yet," I reminded him, though I smiled at his words. "No, but we will." His certainty was comforting, even if I didn't entirely share it. It was during the 4th week of my stay that everything changed. I had been studying a particular text, a Byzantine medical treatise that contained a fascinating discussion of blood diseases. According to the author, a physician who had treated several cases of what he called the curse of unlife, the condition of vampirism was caused by a corruption in the blood itself, a sort of parasitic entity that replaced the natural life force. If that was true, then theoretically, the cure would involve purging the corrupted blood and replacing it with uncorrupted blood, a complete transfusion, essentially. The problem was that the text suggested such a procedure would kill the vampire, as they could not survive without their corrupted blood sustaining them. Unless there was a way to transition gradually, replacing small amounts of blood over time while keeping the vampire stable. I was so absorbed in this theory that I didn't notice when Vlad came to stand behind me. When he spoke, his voice was strained. "Eleanor, you need to stop for tonight." I looked up, startled by his tone. Through our bond, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Hunger. Raw, primal, barely controlled. He was staring at me with eyes that had gone completely black, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every line of his body was tense, coiled like a predator ready to strike. "Vlad?" I said carefully, standing slowly. "What's wrong?" "You've been so focused on your work. You haven't eaten properly in days," he said, his voice rough. "Your blood is calling to me, Eleanor. I can hear your heartbeat, smell your life. and I am very, very hungry. Fear spiked through me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Running would only trigger his predator instincts. When did you last feed? 3 weeks ago, before you arrived. I had hoped to avoid hunting while you were here. I didn't want you to see that side of me. He closed his eyes, struggling for control. But your presence, your blood, the bond between us, it makes the hunger worse. You are connected to me now. Your life force calls to mine. It would be so easy to just... He trailed off, but I could feel through our bond what he wasn't saying. How sweet my blood would taste. How much pleasure there would be in the taking. How the bond would make it more intense than any feeding he had ever experienced. You need to leave, he said, his eyes still closed. Go to your room. Lock the door. Do not come out until morning. No, I said quietly. His eyes snapped open. Eleanor, you don't understand. I am not safe right now. The man you know, the man who wants redemption, he is losing the battle to the monster. If you stay, I may hurt you. You won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. The bond won't let you. I can feel your struggle, Vlad. You're fighting it. You're stronger than the hunger. You have too much faith in me. His voice was anguished. I have killed thousands, Eleanor. What makes you think you would be any different? Because I'm not just your prey. I'm your hope. I took a step toward him. And because if you were going to lose control, you would have already done so. You're warning me instead. That's not a monster acting. That's a man. He laughed, bitter and harsh. A man who is imagining a dozen different ways to drain you dry. A man who is calculating exactly how much blood he could take before your heart stopped. A man who is fighting the urge to sink his teeth into your throat and taste the connection between us in the most intimate way possible. Through our bond, I felt the truth of his words. I felt his hunger, vast and consuming. But I also felt his horror at those thoughts, his desperate will to maintain control, his fear that he might harm the one person who had given him hope. Then feed, I said simply. He stared at me as if I had lost my mind. What? Feed. Take what you need. I'm offering freely. I moved closer, tilting my head to expose my neck. The bond is already in place. A little more of my blood won't change that. And you said yourself that feeding from someone connected to you would be more sustaining. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe you don't need to hunt and kill if you have a willing source. Eleanor, you don't know what you're asking. His voice was strained almost to breaking. Feeding it's not just taking blood, it's intimate. It's pleasure and pain mixed together. It's a violation of everything human, even when given willingly. I trust you, I said softly. And I'm not afraid. That was a lie. I was terrified. But I was also certain that this was a test we both needed to pass. If he could feed from me without killing me, without losing control, then perhaps there was more humanity in him than either of us had believed. Please, he whispered, and I wasn't sure if he was begging me to leave or to stay. I made the choice for both of us. I stepped forward, close enough that I could feel the coldness radiating from his body, and I placed my hand on his chest, over where his heart no longer beat. I trust you, Vlad. Show me that my trust is not misplaced. For a long moment he stood frozen, every muscle locked in the battle between man and monster. Then, slowly, almost reverently, he raised his hand to cup my face. This will hurt, he warned, his thumb brushing my cheek. At first. Then it will feel different. If at any point you want me to stop, push against me. The bond will let me feel your fear. I will stop immediately. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He pulled me gently against him, one arm wrapping around my waist to support me, the other hand cradling the back of my head. Through our bond, I felt his hunger surge, controlled but powerful. I felt his anticipation, his guilt, his desperate hope that he could do this without harming me. His lips brushed my neck, cold and soft. Forgive me, he whispered. Then he bit. The pain was immediate and shocking, his fangs piercing the soft skin of my throat, I gasped, my hands clutching his shoulders, every instinct screaming at me to fight, to flee. But I held still, forcing myself to trust him, to trust the bond between us. And then, just as he had warned, the pain transformed into something else entirely. Pleasure flooded through me, intense and overwhelming. It was like nothing I had ever experienced, every nerve in my body suddenly alive and singing. Through our bond, I felt his pleasure too, the taste of my blood sweeter than anything he had ever known, the connection between us amplifying every sensation. I could feel my life flowing into him, warm and vital. I could sense his body absorbing it, using it, becoming stronger. And underneath it all, I felt something shift in the bond between us, deepening, becoming more complex. He was gentle, far more gentle than he needed to be. He took only what he needed, maintaining careful control despite the hunger raging inside him. Through our bond, I experienced his restraint, the immense effort it took to stop when every instinct demanded he take more. When he finally pulled away, I was dizzy and weak, but alive. He lowered me carefully into a chair, his face transformed. His eyes had returned to their normal dark color, and his skin seemed warmer, more alive. My blood had given him a temporary semblance of life. "Eleanor," he breathed, kneeling before me. "Are you all right? Did I take too much?" "I'm fine," I managed, though my voice was weak. "Just dizzy." He was already moving, bringing me wine and bread, making me eat and drink to restore what I had lost. His hands trembled slightly as he held the cup to my lips, and through our bond, I felt his overwhelming relief that he had maintained control, that he hadn't harmed me. "You were right," he said softly, watching me with wonder. "The bond made you sustaining in a way that random victims never were. I feel stronger, more clear-headed, more human." He touched my face gently. "You are remarkable. You offered yourself to a monster and trusted him not to destroy you." "You're not a monster," I said, covering his cold hand with my warm one. "Not entirely. Not anymore. What we just did, that was trust, Vlad. That was the bond working as it should. You took what you needed and stopped. You proved that you can maintain control." "Only because it was you," he said. "Only because harming you would destroy me. I don't know if I could show such restraint with anyone else." "Then we'll work on that. We'll make you stronger. We'll find a way to restore your humanity completely." I smiled weakly. "But perhaps next time, we should plan better. Make sure I've eaten properly first." He laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "Next time. You're already planning a next time. If we're going to work together, you need to feed. And if feeding from me helps you maintain your humanity, then it's part of the research." I spoke practically, but inside I was still processing what had happened. The intimacy of it, the pleasure, the way our bond had strengthened, wrapping around us both like invisible chains. "You should rest now," he said, helping me to my feet. "Your body needs time to recover." He walked me to my room, supporting me when my legs wobbled. At the door, he hesitated. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for your trust, for your courage, for everything you are doing for me." "Thank you for not proving my trust misplaced," I replied. After he left, I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted but strangely exhilarated. I touched my neck where he had bitten me and found the wounds already healing, closing into 2 small marks that would probably fade completely by morning. Vampire saliva had healing properties, apparently. Through our bond, I could feel Vlad in his own chambers, still marveling at how different he felt. The blood had given him temporary warmth, temporary strength. For a few hours, he would feel almost human again. And that gave me an idea. If regular feedings from a bonded source could temporarily restore aspects of his humanity, then perhaps that was part of the answer. Perhaps the cure wasn't a single dramatic transformation, but a gradual process. Small amounts of living blood given regularly, slowly replacing the corrupted blood in his system, until eventually the balance shifted and the curse broke. It would take time, months, perhaps years, but it might work. I fell asleep thinking about blood ratios and transfusion schedules, my mind already working on calculations. In my dreams, I saw Vlad standing in sunlight, but this time he was reaching back toward me, pulling me into the light with him. When I woke, it was late afternoon, and I felt surprisingly good considering what I had been through. The dizziness was gone, replaced by a strange energy. I felt more alive than I had in weeks, as if the act of feeding him had somehow awakened something in me. I went to the mirror and examined my neck. The bite marks were still visible but faint, like shadows under my skin. I touched them and felt an echo of the pleasure from the night before, making me shiver. This was dangerous territory. The feeding had been far more intimate than I had anticipated. And the pleasure, that had been unexpected. No wonder vampires were associated with seduction. If every feeding felt like that, it would be easy to become addicted to it. I needed to be careful. I needed to maintain my objectivity. Remember that this was research, a means to an end. I couldn't allow myself to become too entangled emotionally. But even as I thought it, I knew it was too late. I was already entangled. The bond saw to that. And what had happened last night had only made it worse. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Gregor, bringing my evening meal. "The Count wishes to see you in the library when you are ready, miss," he said, his eyes flickering to my neck. If he noticed the marks, he said nothing. "Thank you, Gregor. Tell him I'll be there shortly." After eating and preparing myself, I made my way to the library. Vlad was waiting, surrounded by open books. He looked different in the lamplight, warmer somehow, more present. The feeding had affected him more than I had realized. "How do you feel?" he asked as soon as I entered. "Fine. Better than fine, actually. I think I have an idea about the cure." His eyes lit up with hope. "Tell me." I explained my theory about gradual transfusion, about replacing the corrupted blood slowly over time until his body could sustain mortal blood again. He listened intently, asking questions, poking holes in my logic, helping me refine the idea. "It could work," he said finally. "It would take time, but it could work. We would need to carefully monitor the process, adjust the amounts, watch for signs of rejection or deterioration." He looked at me seriously. "And it would mean regular feedings, multiple times a week, perhaps daily, as the process accelerated." "Eleanor, are you certain you want to commit to that?" "I'm certain," I said, though my heart raced at the thought. "This is what I came here to do. This is how we save you." He studied me for a long moment, and I felt through our bond his mixture of hope, fear, and something else. Something deeper and more complex that I couldn't quite identify. "Very well," he said. "Then we proceed. We will begin tonight, establish a baseline. We will monitor carefully, adjust as needed. And we will see if your brilliant theory can accomplish what 500 years of suffering could not." He came around the desk and took my hands in his eyes searching mine. "You are giving me something I never dared hope for, Eleanor. Not just a possible cure, but proof that I am not beyond redemption. Proof that the monster can become a man again." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I will not forget this. Whatever happens, whatever the outcome, I will be forever in your debt. Let's save your gratitude for when we succeed," I said, trying to lighten the moment even as my heart pounded at his nearness. He smiled, sad and beautiful. "Ever practical. It's one of the things I admire about you." We returned to our research, but something had shifted between us. The bond was stronger now, deeper. And the memory of last night's feeding hung between us, a shared intimacy that neither of us could ignore. I had come to Castle Dracula to find answers, to complete my father's work. But I was beginning to realize that I might find something else entirely. Something dangerous and forbidden and impossible. I was beginning to care for him, not just as a research subject, not just as someone to be saved, but as a man. A lonely, ancient, tortured man who had somehow managed to hold on to fragments of his humanity despite centuries of darkness. And that terrified me more than any vampire ever could. Because if I fell in love with a monster, what did that make me? The question haunted me as we worked through the night, our bond humming between us, our purposes aligned, our fates intertwined in ways that neither of us fully understood yet. But I would understand soon enough. And when I did, everything would change. 2 months passed in a blur of research, experiments, and nightly feedings. The process was working, slowly but unmistakably. Each time Vlad fed from me, I could see subtle changes. His skin grew warmer. His movements became less predatory, more human. The darkness in his eyes receded, replaced by something that looked almost like life. But the changes in me were just as profound. The regular feedings had altered me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was stronger now, faster, my senses sharper than any mortal's should be. I could see in near darkness. I could hear conversations from rooms away. And I had stopped aging. My reflection looked exactly as it had the day I arrived at the castle. The bond had done this, Vlad explained. By regularly exchanging blood, I had absorbed some of his immortality without fully transforming. I was something in between. No longer entirely human, but not vampire either. A bridge between two worlds. It will fade if we stop the feedings, he assured me one night as we worked in the laboratory we had established. When the treatment is complete, when I am mortal again, the bond will weaken. You will return to normal aging. And if the treatment fails? I asked, measuring out careful amounts of purified blood. What happens to me then? He was silent for a long moment. Then you would have a choice to make. Continue as you are, aging slowly but still mortal, or complete the transformation and become like me. Immortal, I said softly. Yes. Though I would never force that choice upon you. It would be yours alone. But we both knew the truth. The longer we continued, the harder it would be to reverse. I was already more than halfway to becoming a vampire myself. And there were nights when I wasn't sure if that frightened me or thrilled me. Because the feedings had become something more than medical necessity. They were intimate, passionate, a connection between us that went beyond blood. When he fed from me, I felt his hunger, his pleasure, his growing affection. And he felt mine. We were falling in love, vampire and mortal, bound together by blood and need and the desperate hope that we could save each other. It was Gregor who finally forced us to confront what we were avoiding. I found him in the kitchen one morning, looking older and more tired than usual. When he saw me, something like pity crossed his weathered face. Miss Eleanor, I need to speak with you. Of course, Gregor. What's wrong? He glanced around to ensure we were alone. I have served the Count for 40 years. I have seen many things, met many people who came to this castle. None of them ended well. My heart clenched. What are you trying to say? I am saying that you are different from the others. You have shown him kindness, given him hope, and he has fallen in love with you. He fixed me with a stern look. But love between mortal and vampire never ends in happiness, miss. One of you must change, or one of you must die. There is no middle path. We're working on changing him, I protested. The treatment is working in a few more months. And what if it fails? Gregor interrupted. What if, after all this, he remains what he is? Will you leave him? Will you return to your mortal life and let him continue his existence alone? Or will you stay and slowly transform into the very thing he hates being? I had no answer. I had been avoiding this question for weeks, focusing on the research, on the daily progress, refusing to think about the ultimate outcome. You must decide, miss. Not for him, but for yourself. What is it that you truly want? He left me alone with that question burning in my mind. That evening, I found Vlad in the tower room, staring out at the mountains. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Through our bond, I felt his turmoil, his conflict. You spoke with Gregor, he said without turning around. Yes. He is right, you know. We have been avoiding the truth. He finally turned to face me, and the anguish in his eyes made my heart ache. Eleanor, I have been selfish. I have allowed this to continue because I wanted it to. Because for the first time in centuries, I have felt something besides loneliness. But I have not considered what it is costing you. What do you mean? You came here to help me become human, But instead, I am turning you into a monster like me. You don't age anymore. You drink wine but barely touch food. Your eyes glow in the darkness when you forget to hide it. You are transforming, Eleanor, and I am the cause. The bond, I began. The bond is irreversible now, he said flatly. We have gone too far. Even if the treatment succeeds, even if I become mortal, you will never be fully human again. I have stolen that from you. I walked to him, placing my hand on his arm. You stole nothing. I chose this. Every step of the way I chose. But did you understand what you were choosing? Did you know that saving me would cost you yourself? I understood enough. I turned him to face me fully. Vlad, I don't regret what we've done. Yes, I've changed, but so have you. You're warmer now, more alive. The darkness in you is receding. In another few months, you might actually be human again. How can I regret that? And what then? He asked desperately. If I become mortal and you remain half transformed, I will age and die within a few decades while you continue on, forever marked by your time with me. Is that the future you want? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what I want anymore. I came here with such certainty, such purpose. But now you are caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, and I am to blame. Stop taking responsibility for my choices, I said with sudden heat. I am not some helpless maiden you corrupted. I am a scientist, a scholar, a woman who made an informed decision. Yes, I'm changing. Yes, the future is uncertain. But that doesn't mean I regret the path that brought me here. That brought me to you. The words hung between us, finally spoken aloud. The truth neither of us had dared voice. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch so much warmer than it had been 2 months ago. Eleanor, my brilliant, stubborn, beautiful Eleanor, what have we done to each other? We saved each other, I whispered. Or we're trying to. Isn't that enough? It should be, but I fear it is not. He rested his forehead against mine, and through our bond, I felt his conflict. His love for me warring with his guilt. His hope for the future clashing with his fear that we had doomed us both. There is another option, he said finally, pulling back to look at me. One we have not discussed. What option? Stop the treatment. Allow me to remain as I am, and complete your transformation. Become vampire fully, and stay with me. Not as my test subject or my researcher, but as my companion, my equal, my... He trailed off, unable to say the word. Your lover, I finished softly. Yes. The offer hung in the air between us, tempting and terrible. Immortality. Eternal companionship with a being I had come to love. No more fear of death or aging or loss. But also, darkness. The hunger for blood. The inability to walk in sunlight. The knowledge that I would become the very thing my mother had feared, the very thing my father had spent his life studying. I need time to think, I said. He nodded, releasing me. Of course. This is not a decision to be made lightly. Take all the time you need. But we both knew time was running out. The treatment was reaching a critical phase. Soon we would know if it would succeed or fail. And when that moment came, I would have to choose. Save him and lose myself. Or save myself and condemn him to eternal darkness. Unless there was a third way. I spent the next week in feverish research, barely sleeping, driven by desperation. There had to be an answer, a way for us both to survive, to be together without one of us sacrificing everything. And finally, buried in an obscure alchemical text that predated Christianity, I found it. The Ritual of Dawn. According to the text, if a vampire successfully returned to mortality, the bond with his companion would not weaken but transform. It would become something new, a connection between mortal souls rather than between death and life. And if performed correctly, the ritual would allow the companion to return to full mortality as well, cleansed of the vampire's taint. We would both be human, both mortal, both free. I ran to find Vlad, my heart pounding with hope. He was in his chambers, reading by candlelight, and when he saw my face, he stood immediately. "Eleanor? What is it?" "I found something. A way for us both to be saved." I showed him the text, explained the ritual, watched as hope and fear warred on his face. "It's dangerous," he said, reading the warnings carefully. "The transition back to mortality is traumatic enough. Adding a ritual to sever and transform the bond simultaneously?" He looked at me seriously. "You could die, Eleanor. We both could. Or we could both live. Truly live. Not as vampire and half-vampire, but as two human beings." I gripped his hands. "It's risky, but it's a chance. A chance for the future we both want." He searched my face, and through our bond, I felt his wonder, his fear, his overwhelming love. "You would risk death for the chance to be mortal with me?" "Yes. Because immortality without you would be a prison, and mortality with you would be heaven." He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I do not deserve you. I have never deserved you. Let's save the self-recrimination for after we succeed," I said, my face pressed against his chest. "Right now we have work to do." The preparations took another month. We had to time everything perfectly. The final stage of the blood treatment, the phases of the moon, the gathering of rare ingredients for the ritual. Every day brought us closer to the moment that would determine our fate, and every night, as Vlad fed from me, our connection grew stronger, more complex. We were becoming one being in two bodies, our thoughts and feelings flowing together until sometimes I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. "Are you afraid?" he asked me one night, as we lay together in the darkness after feeding. We had long since abandoned the pretense of propriety. We were bound in every way that mattered. "Terrified," I admitted, but also hopeful. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters, something that could change everything. "If this works, if we both survive as mortals, what will you do?" His fingers traced patterns on my arm, and I shivered at the touch. "I don't know. Continue my research, I suppose. Write about what we learned, though no one would believe it." I turned to look at him in the darkness. "What about you? What will you do if you're human again?" "I will walk in sunlight," he said immediately. "I will taste food and wine as I once did. I will sleep without nightmares. And I will court you properly, Eleanor Aldrich, the way you deserve to be courted. With flowers and poetry, and all the beautiful, mundane rituals of mortal love." Tears stung my eyes. "That sounds perfect. If it works," he reminded me softly. "It will work. It has to work." The night of the ritual arrived with a full moon hanging heavy in the sky. We prepared in the same chamber where we had first formed our bond, the circular room deep in the heart of the castle. But this time, the altar held different instruments: herbs and crystals, sacred oils and blessed water. Gregor helped us prepare, his ancient face grave but not without hope. "You are brave, both of you. The Count was right to trust you, miss. You have given him something he thought lost forever. Thank you, Gregor, for everything." He bowed and retreated, leaving Vlad and me alone. We stood facing each other across the altar, dressed in simple white robes. Through our bond, I felt his fear and hope mirroring my own. "Last chance to reconsider," he said, trying for levity but falling short. "Not a chance. We do this together or not at all." He smiled, and in that smile, I saw not the vampire Count Dracula, but the man Vlad, who I had come to love with everything I was. The ritual was complex, requiring precise timing and perfect synchronization. We drank a mixture that contained the last of the purified blood, herbs that would bind us to mortal flesh, and compounds that would sever our connection to darkness. Then, as the moon reached its zenith, we cut our palms, the same palms we had cut months ago to forge the bond, and pressed them together, letting our blood mingle one final time. Power surged through the bond, burning like fire in my veins. I felt Vlad's anguish as the vampire curse began to tear away from his soul, centuries of corruption being ripped out by the roots. Through his eyes, I saw my own transformation as the immortal taint was purged from my body. It was agony. It was ecstasy. It was death and birth happening simultaneously. And then, just when I thought I couldn't endure another second, the pain vanished. I fell forward and Vlad caught me. We collapsed together onto the cold stone floor, gasping, trembling, clinging to each other as we waited to see if we had survived. Slowly I became aware of my body, my heartbeat strong and steady, my breathing deep and regular, the warmth of my skin, the weight of my limbs. I was alive, and I was mortal. "Vlad?" I whispered. "I'm here." His voice was rough but human, so human it made me want to weep. "Eleanor, I can feel my heartbeat. My heart is beating again." We pulled apart just enough to look at each other. His eyes, which had been dark for centuries, were now a warm brown in the candlelight. His skin glowed with life. His chest rose and fell with breath he actually needed. He was human. After 500 years, he was finally, truly human. "Did it work?" I asked, afraid to hope. "Am I mortal?" he confirmed, touching my face with wonder. "Completely mortal. The immortal taint is gone. You will age, Eleanor. You will live a natural span of years, and so will I." We sat there on the cold floor, holding each other, laughing and crying in equal measure. We had done it. Against all odds, against the weight of centuries and curses and dark magic, we had done it. We were free. The bond was different now, lighter, gentler. Still present, but no longer consuming. We could sense each other still, but our thoughts were our own again. We were separate beings, choosing to be together rather than forced by magic. It was perfect. "Come," Vlad said, pulling me to my feet. "The sun will rise soon. I want to see it." We climbed the tower stairs hand in hand, reaching the highest point of the castle just as the eastern sky began to lighten. Gregor found us there, and the joy on his ancient face when he saw us, truly saw us, mortal and alive, was beautiful to behold. "It worked," he breathed. "After all these years, it actually worked. The Count is free." "We're both free," Vlad corrected, his arm around my waist. None of this would have been possible without Eleanor. We stood together and watched as the sun crested the mountains, bathing the world in golden light. And when the first rays touched Vlad's face, when he felt the warmth without pain for the first time in 5 centuries, the expression of pure, transcendent joy on his face was worth every risk, every sacrifice. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face, and kissed me in the sunlight. Not a vampire's kiss, cold and dangerous, but a man's kiss, warm and alive and human. "Thank you," he whispered against my lips. "Thank you for seeing the man I could be. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for loving me enough to risk everything." "Thank you for being worth saving," I replied, smiling through my own tears. We had a future now. A real future, measured in decades rather than centuries, precious because it was finite. We would return to London, I decided. We would continue our research, publish our findings, carefully edited, of course. We would live quiet lives, unremarkable lives, beautiful lives. And when we grew old, when our time came, we would die together, having lived fully and loved completely. It was everything I had never dared dream of. That evening, as we began preparations to leave the castle that had been both prison and salvation, Vlad took my hand and looked at me with those newly human eyes. "Eleanor Aldrich, will you marry me? Not because of bonds or magic or necessity, but because I love you and I want to spend every one of my remaining mortal days with you?" I didn't hesitate. Yes, 1,000 times yes. We were married in the small village at the foot of the mountain, with Gregor as our witness and the priest blessing a union he didn't fully understand but could see was genuine. I wore a simple dress. Vlad wore a smile that hadn't left his face since sunrise. We returned to London as Mr. and Mrs. Tepesh, Vlad's true surname, reclaimed after centuries. We bought a townhouse near my father's old home and filled it with books and light and laughter. Sometimes, late at night, Vlad would wake from dreams of his long existence, and I would hold him until the nightmares faded. And sometimes I would feel a phantom echo of the bond we once shared, and I would find him already awake, sensing my unease, ready to comfort me. We wrote a book together, a scientific treatise on blood diseases and their treatments, carefully omitting the supernatural elements. It was well received in academic circles, and we were invited to lecture at universities across Europe. We lived. We loved. We aged together, finding beauty in every gray hair, every wrinkle, every sign of mortality. And 30 years later, when we were both old and our time was running short, we lay together in our bed, holding hands, as we had held them through ritual and transformation and life. "Do you regret it?" I asked him, my voice thin with age but still strong with love. "Giving up immortality? You could have lived forever." "I lived too long already," he said, his own voice weathered but content. "These 30 years with you have been worth more than 500 years of darkness. I would not trade a single day." "Neither would I." He kissed my forehead, gentle and tender. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. For saving me. For loving me. For giving me the most precious gift of all, a natural death after a life worth living." "We saved each other," I corrected. "Just like we always did." We fell asleep that night in each other's arms, our hearts beating in synchrony. And when morning came, the servants found us still holding hands, peaceful smiles on our faces, having slipped together into whatever comes after. Two mortal souls who had faced darkness and chosen light, who had been offered eternity and chosen love instead, who had discovered that true immortality lies not in living forever, but in living well, in loving deeply, in finding redemption even when it seems impossible. Count Dracula had offered me eternal life, and the price was an unbreakable bond. But in the end, I gave him something far more valuable, a mortal life worth living, and love that transcended death itself. And that was the greatest magic of all.